Hello, my friends, and welcome to today's Top Leaders. I am so excited to be with you today because we have a fantastic guest, Robert Merrill, with us. So welcome, Robert.
Hi.
Glad to have you. So let me tell you
Yes.
guys a little bit about Robert, and then we're going to jump in because Robert has this amazing sixth sense about recruiting. You guys are going to get some really fabulous stuff today. So Robert has been in the recruiting industry since 2005. I know when you think of that, like since 2005, like that's like a million years ago. So he's been around a minute. So you got to listen up to what he has to say. He is passionate about the value that good recruiting can bring to companies, but especially people who deserve high paying and meaningful work. He founded Connected Well in 2018 with the mission to help companies solve not only hiring challenges, but improve their talent acquisition processes from A to Z, enabling companies to hire more efficiently with less bias and more inclusion, as well as providing candidates with an excellent experience and onboarding to set them up for the highest success. Oh, so good. Robert is passionate about what he calls hiring made human, which touches on the idea that we should never forget the person involved at each step of the recruiting process. The hiring manager, the interviewers, and the candidates are all humans with desires and dreams. In this world of tech and automation, we should never automate human connection. The more we connect with and truly see each other in the process, Robert believes we will naturally level up our talent acquisition abilities and be better off ourselves for it. So again, Robert, thanks for joining me on today's Top Leaders.
Yeah. Thanks a lot for having me. Wow. Listening to that, I'm like, that's really great stuff. I'm excited to, I want to listen. So
Yeah,
this is great.
good. I know you better be able to want to listen to what you've got to say, right? And and Robert, I specifically invited you to come join me on today's Top Leaders because I know you've been around recruiting for a hot minute, indeed, right? And so I
Yeah.
love that. I love that it's something that you have continued to champion over the decades, which is awesome, right?
Yeah.
And so it's a good thing that you're doing. So before we jump into it, I'm going to come at you fast with some rapid fire questions. Here
Great.
we go.
Bring it on.
Okay. Salty or sweet?
Salty.
Okay. What's your favorite book today?
Favorite book today. Wow. Let's see. Business book. I really like 4 Hour Work Week. It just
Oh,
changes the way that you think
yeah.
about how you get things done.
Uh-huh.
I really like the journal, the Almanac of Naval Ravikant.
Mm.
Super strange book, but this guy, he's the founder of Angel List and has a really fascinating viewpoint on how work and life and everything else kind of works together.
Mm.
That book, he didn't write it. Actually, it was cobbled together from several things that he spoke and said and wrote and commented and other different podcasts that he was on. But Naval, Naval Ravikant.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a very
Ooh,
fascinating
yeah.
philosophical kind of a
Mm-hmm.
book.
Nice.
I
Oh,
also
yeah.
really like Brandon Sanderson novels. If anyone likes fantasy,
Mm.
I really like the Way of Kings series. So
Okay, cool. Oh, so good. So good. All right. And right now you get to travel to one place. Where do you want to go?
wow. A couple of years ago, I was lucky enough to go visit Costa Rica for a week with my
Mm-hmm.
wife. And that was a wonderful place. I just felt really at home there. It was really interesting to be in a place that
Oh,
was not America, North America, kind of this normal kind of world that I've been in my whole life. But that was a wonderful place. I felt welcome and home, and I'd love to get back
mm.
there again.
Okay, Costa Rica. Sounds good. Pack your
Yeah.
bags. Let's do it. Okay, good stuff. All right, wonderful. So, recruiting. This is like a thing. So, let's just talk for a second, just in case if anybody's not familiar with what the recruiting industry is and what. So, give us the lowdown, the kind of quick 1 minute cliff notes. What is a recruiting industry today?
Sure, that's an interesting question. I think depending on your industry, given if your audience, mostly tech leaders, you
Mm-hmm.
probably are aware of kind of some of the stuff in recruiting. But I think that in general, what's interesting is I've seen over the years this transition to internet recruiting, and it seems like every couple of years there's someone that comes out and says, in 5 years recruiters will be obsolete. Well, I think the reason why they do that is because it makes sense. If there's Google that can match jobs and people, if there's algorithms and Indeed.com and all of these other things, like you'd think recruiters wouldn't be necessary. But it really does come back down to the human element of it. At the end of the day, there's a person out there with skills and talents and dreams and desires. And there's you and your company that you have dreams and desires and vision and goals, and getting those lined up is not as easy as, plugging in a software application to do a task. A person can't be just crammed into a box and expected to succeed. So I think wherever there are people that are going to be asked to do certain kinds of work, I think good humans getting involved in that process are going to be important. Recruiting has changed a lot over the years. I think that companies have moved from never hiring or using, just putting up a job posting and letting the HR handle it, to then, hiring headhunters or third-party recruiters to come in and they charge a big fee, to hiring their own recruiters. And then they'd have a big hiring staff, which in the last several years has been challenging, because then with the economy and everything else, then, the recruiters are the first to be laid off, which is a negative impact sometimes on the company, because they're the most social network active people in your company, usually, besides your marketing department, sales, and then your recruiters. And so everyone in the world that could be looking at your company is seeing all your recruiters that are out of work. And that's a negative kind of a thing. So yeah. I think a lot of companies are recognizing that recruiting as a function has been a little bit left behind. Really savvy companies are treating recruiting more like a sales or a marketing function, a very creative function, and something where they can actually take a lot of the things that companies have learned in sales, marketing, operations, and apply them in this world of trying to attract, potentially your best customer could also be your employees. So attracting really fantastic creative people to your company through a process that is much more like, what other companies might call a sales process or a marketing process. And I think, great books like Good to Great, Dare to Lead, these books talk about hiring is something that companies do all the time. And great companies, Good to Great, I think talks about this specifically. Good companies hire all the time. That's what they do, and they get really, really good at it. And that's how they go from good to great.
Yeah. Thank you for that. It's so we're gonna let the cat out of the bag on this, y'all. So Robert and I used to work at competing recruiting companies. 2,700 years ago, we did this.
Well, and I learned right away that if you were working with a client, I didn't bother them because they were being well taken care of. So
thank you very much.
I breathed a sigh of relief when you left the industry. Let's just say that.
Nice. That's great. And I did leave the recruiting industry back in 2009. I did. Yeah. And so, because I came to a place of recruiters are great. They absolutely fulfill a thing that is a very, very important aspect of getting the right people on board, right? And then what was, satisfying more to me was like, okay, yeah, but now you have this new person in your company. What are you doing to love on them in an HR appropriate way? But what are you doing to love on them and to take care of them, to grow them and to develop them, right? So that's kind of, the other side of it. But I mean, back in the day when we got started, like, things like LinkedIn didn't even exist. I totally remember when that came on the scene, and I'm like, this is going to be a game changer.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. That's really, I think in the last couple of years, even taken another level up. Like, look how much more I hear people talking about TikTok and LinkedIn in the same paragraphs. And that is mind blowing to me. Like, why are these even on the same planet? But it is interesting how much more powerful some of these networks are now.
Yeah. Right. Absolutely. And back in the day, it was flat out, who do you know? Right. What networking event are you going to? Things like that. And so I've talked to a lot of managers in tech, especially in the last, I don't know, probably 10 years or so. I'm like, what are you doing to help with recruiting? And they look at me like I have a third eye in the middle of my forehead. Like, what are you talking about, Jen? I, as a manager, I don't help with recruiting. I've got the recruiters over here, HR over here. They're supposed to do it, but I don't know. That's not necessarily helpful.
That's an interesting thing. We talk about, I think in sales, there's a statement I remember a long time ago. I don't know if it was Covey or someone that said people like to buy, uh, people buy from people they know, like, and trust.
Yeah.
And there's an interesting element there. If you think about that, sales, that's a sales thing. But if you think about work, like why people show up to work, it's, if it's the next time there's a Monday and it's been a long weekend, why does someone show up at work, ready to go and excited about what's coming up, as if you're a manager, what it's like when you see someone on your team kind of check out, right? And you're like, they were so on top of it. And now it's like, I can barely get them to log into the Zoom meeting once a week to like check in with the team. And you're like, what am I going to do? So there is an element of building your team that comes from the trust, being able to go back and say, like, look, when things aren't going well, how do you have that conversation? It's like, what's happening? Like, what's really going on? And if you don't develop that trust, and that capacity of trust between you and your people on your team, that becomes a really challenging place to manage from. So why wouldn't you leverage the opportunity to bring people onto your team that you already know, like, and trust, that already know, like, and trust you? There's some elements in there we can talk about relative to diversity and inclusion that need to be probably addressed. Because what you don't want to do is have a whole team of people that all look the same. I don't know. There's a popular meme online of these like guys at a baseball game or something, and they all look literally the same. Like they're all cousins or something, and they're all looking at the camera, and it just looks like this mirror image. You don't want your team to look like that. If everyone's thinking the same thing, they all had the same experiences, all went to the same schools, end of the day, you're not going to have a lot of creativity when it comes to solving really challenging problems. But also there is a wide world out there, and there's a lot of really fascinating, wonderful, amazing people. And that if you're willing to kind of be a participant in the network, you could actually develop relationships with people that maybe you've never worked with before, but you do know a little bit about before you bring them into your team to interview. And there might be an opportunity to build some trust there. So there's also the other part of someone that you trust that trusts someone else. That's really the thing that recruiters do in a job. It's, it's like, why do you put your money in a bank? Well, it's because I trust that they're going to keep it safe, and when I want it back, I can go get it from them. The reason recruiters have a job is that I know enough people that if you don't know enough people, I hopefully know some people that you should know. So that's the objective that recruiting allows for you to have. But if you can create your own network where you have trusted contacts, trusted leaders who have been where you're trying to go, and they probably know people. Oh, I've been there, and this is the one person you need to talk to before you go over that hump, that hill ahead of you. You need to bring this person into your team, or at least have a conversation with them about where you're going. That's valuable. Why not? Why wouldn't you do that?
Right. Yeah, absolutely. No, it totally makes sense. It's like, anyhow, recently we needed to have some landscaping done. And I was like, I've moved to a new state. Like, I don't know people, it's,
Right.
like I can't go to my neighbor, like, oh yeah, last year, didn't you have somebody like redo your fence or whatever? Who, like, I don't know people. Right. So we had to do the good old fashioned, let our fingers do the walking, if you will. Right. And we just called and we looked at but I really appreciated what people said on Google, for example, the reviews, like the honest reviews. And I was like, I'm so glad that people are, are being honest, because it's helping to give me some insight. And so, but when it comes back to recruiting, it's like, we need that honest approach. Who do we know? Like, who, and I think sometimes like we're almost scared to say things about people.
Right.
So then it gets really difficult.
No, there's there's an element of that. Yeah, you're absolutely right.
Right, for sure. One thing, Robert, I know that you're really big on is looking at those biases, right? And so biases in hiring and whatnot. And so can we talk about that a little bit? Because I think sometimes when people are feeling that trepidation, they don't want to speak up, they don't want to say something. So, is it part of that bias stuff that you're talking? Let's get into that a little bit.
Sure. Yeah, I think that there is just about anything you can start to wade in. People say things like, well, I know enough to be dangerous, and that's like always like a joke, but it is sometimes, if you don't really take the time to learn a little bit more, you could actually be dangerous. And I have seen people that say, no, 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 we're super inclusive, and then I look at their process and it's actually the opposite of inclusive. What they mean is that they include all of their friends. It's not inclusive in terms of what that means. But also, you can also go too far down that rabbit hole and get to the point where you're so unbiased that there's actually no, like almost no human interaction at all. I mean, could you imagine the ridiculousness of hiring through like bubble sheet Scantron tests? Like, okay, answer these 400 questions, and then we're going to run all these tests through, and the one that gets the highest score gets hired. It might work. I think if any company on the earth would try it, it would be Google. And look at what Laszlo Bach in the Work Rules book said. Look, they tried to figure out, is it university? Is it GPA score? Is it where you grew up? Is it all of these different factors that they put in? And they realized that it actually isn't any of that stuff. It's actually aptitude, capacity, willingness to work on stuff, willingness to like stick through to the end to solve those problems all the way through. So that being said, you could go too far into the bias and inclusion thing too, right? I do know that there's a couple of standout things, and I would say this: I gave a talk a little while ago called "Hack Your Biases," which is the idea. There was a meme that I saw once that had a picture, and this must have been like on a college campus, right, where it had a grassy area, and there was a sidewalk that was very nicely done, and a little gate that you had to go through, and it was kind of complicated to go through. And it said, this is the designed experience, right? And then it had a path that had been cut through the grass, like right to the side, and it said, this is user experience. This is what people actually do. This is what the architect designed. This is what people actually do. So if you recognize that you're human, you do have biases, you do have things that, and by definition of a bias, you don't see it, right? It's not something you notice. If you're ever driving and then you're kind of changing lanes and like there's a car there, suddenly you're like, well, they were not there a second ago. Well, they probably were there a second ago, but they were in your blind spot. You didn't see them. So how can you hack your biases? Don't lose the humanity of the hiring process and experience, but also hack your biases. And we could go into there's a couple of key items I think people can keep in mind, but just recognizing the idea that don't feel like, I think the two things you don't want to do is don't just hire the first person that you come across because you're like, no, they seem great. Like my brother knows who they are and we both went to the same school, and sure, don't do that. Also, don't do the other version where you are so non-human about it that everything, like, don't talk to me on the phone. I don't want to hear your accent of your voice because I might bias me against hiring you or something. Don't get that weird either. Somewhere in the middle, there has to be a place. And I've got a couple of things I could give some hints on if you'd like, but
of course, absolutely. Do tell, Robert. Give us a hint.
Okay. All right. Well, here's what I would say. I think there's 3 things that you could look at, and I just took a couple of notes here. I think the first one is start with the end in mind. Anyone that's ever read the Covey stuff knows what that means. So intentionally, I use that to kind of call out, what are you trying to accomplish? And the 2 caveats I would say there. So let me tell you what the 3 are, and then I'll go back. Okay. Start with the end in mind, stick to the script, and then use an easy scorecard. So starting with the end in mind, really what I mean there is, what are you trying to accomplish for this person? And put yourself in the mind of that other human that's coming onto your team. You're probably hiring because there's something in the next 100 or 200 days that if it doesn't work, things are going to be really bad. So there's something that might be on fire. It might be smoldering. And if it doesn't get handled, it's going to be really bad. But once that fire's out, what is that person going to do? And if you don't have something for them after that, you should really seriously consider whether or not you should hire somebody. Because maybe a consultant or a contractor is a better idea. But 2 or 3 years from now, what is going to be happening on the team, in the company, for you in your personal career? What's that going to create for this new person so that they can feel like they have a reason to be there too? So keep that in mind. What are you trying to accomplish in not only the next 100 days, but in the next 2 years? You probably don't have to go much further than that. But that's a pretty good place to start from.
Yeah.
And then work backward from there and go, okay, so I'm going to need someone that's pretty good in operations, because maybe you've got a team and there's some operational things that need to be kind of reconfigured. And you're thinking that's a pretty consistent process that I could use some help on, maybe slightly technical, but maybe a little more creative in writing or something. And you create these little blocks of ideas that you're thinking, these are important. These are things that I need to have in the person that I'm looking for. So that's your begin to the end in mind, or start with the end in mind. Then you're going to write a job description. And I would encourage you to be very careful about not putting everything in there. One of the things that I laugh about with job descriptions is, in my mind, I have this like internal story of like, oh, when you see a really bad job description that's like 3 pages long, I can almost guarantee you that what happened was someone on the team is like, I need help or I'm going to quit. And then finally the manager's like, okay, I got approval. So we need to hire someone. What should we have them do? Right. So you've got this overworked, probably, emotionally underpaid employee that's not getting help. And now you're asking them to write a job description. So how are they going to write that? They're going to write down every single thing that they ever do because you don't appreciate them at all. So then you end up with a job description that's 76 bullet points long, because what they're actually saying is, you don't see me, right? You don't appreciate what I do for you. And so then you have this ridiculous job description that's not actually helpful. You don't need to know all of these different things. You probably need to know a couple of things. I like job descriptions that say, basically in paragraph form, generally, what are you trying to accomplish on this team? And then maybe some bullets that basically repeat the same information, but in bullet form, because people like to read bullets. It's easy to skim through. And then a section below that of the required skills or capabilities that the person needs to have. There's a phrase in HR I picked up a long time ago called KSAs, knowledge, skills, and abilities. And you should have a fair balance of all of those things. If everything you've written down is like SQL scripting and Python, and they have to have C++ and also calculus and all of these things, and they're very technical, or they're very like skill things, and there's not a lot of knowledge or ability, then you're probably leaning too far down one rabbit hole than the other. Okay. So I would just try to have a balance of knowledge, skills, and abilities. So KSAs in your job posting. Try not to make it too long. See if you can keep your required items to less than 4, 2 or 3 at the most. A lot of managers push back on that. And my question is, okay, well, if you had the absolute perfect person and they came to you with 2 of these, but not the third one, but they were close, would you absolutely not hire them? I'm like, no, I'd probably hire them. I'm like, okay, so it's not required. It's preferred. And I would try to keep that list as about as short as possible, because the longer your list of requirements are, you think about buying a car, the longer your list of it has to be blue, and it has to have this and X miles per gallon and everything else, the shorter grouping of potential cars become available to you.
Yeah.
Then stick to the script. Number 2, I would say that you create a process. If you have a recruiting partner, great. But normally there's 2 or 3 steps in the process. I would have somebody, whether it's you or someone on your team, do an initial call with a candidate, and then have them come in and visit with the team, and then finally have a final interview with either an executive or with yourself again as a final check-in before you extend an offer. Somewhere in that process, you probably want to have regular check-ins with whoever's helping you with the hiring. So anyone who's managing the interview process or scheduling with candidates, check in with your team perhaps every once in a while, and perhaps every time you have an on-site interview, have a debrief meeting after the on-sites, but not the same day. I would do it maybe the next day or a couple of days later. That gives everyone a chance to fill out a scorecard, which is number 3. In a scorecard, a lot of applicant systems do help you build a scorecard, but if you don't have one, there's a really simple scorecard method I like to use that's called skill, will, and fit. And I try to give a 1 to 5 score on skill, will, and fit. And then I take the average of that, and that's my general candidate score. And the idea of skill, will, and fit is, can you do the job? Will you do the job? And will you enjoy doing the job? So that's what I'm looking for. And I think if you kind of hone in on those three areas, generally speaking, if someone has anything that they're like, they could do the job, but they will not be happy doing this job, that's a really relevant thing for you to consider.
Mm-hmm.
Some people call that culture fit, and I get really nervous about that because culture fit can be a very confusing phrase. So I like to think of, would they enjoy doing the job, or would they enjoy doing the job in the way we do this job? Maybe you're a on-site only company and they really don't want to be on site. So could they do the job? Would they do the job? But would they enjoy doing the job? They might not.
Mm-hmm.
And that might be a relevant thing for you to bring up.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, that
yeah.
makes a lot of sense. That's interesting. Okay. So if we come back to some of these biases too, and I was laughing about your point about the baseball team, right? And everybody's lined up and they basically look
Mhm.
like carbon copies of each other.
Yeah.
You know what I
Yeah.
mean? And so, and for, so then it's, okay, so how do we avoid that, right? I mean, because there's lots of studies out there that show that when you have diversity of thought and different
Mhm.
backgrounds and whatnot, and I'm not just talking like man, woman, you know what I mean?
Yes.
Like a bigger, different, like different ages, right? Different
Uh-huh.
people who've grown up in different countries and whatnot, like that kind of diversity.
Uh-huh.
And so can we talk about that a little bit? Because I think sometimes there's these biases of like, yeah, but I don't know them, right? So I don't
Yes.
know the culture they came from. So then I, as a manager, I'm nervous to manage that,
Yeah.
right? I feel like I'm seeing that a lot. So is that something in the bias?
Yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah, I think one of the other diversity items that's getting more and more attention now is neurodiversity as well. And it could come down to as simple as you have a team full of people that are extroverts and you have one introvert,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
And that you're like, they don't ever talk, and if you I am an extrovert. When I took the Myers-Briggs, like my extrovert score was so far to the side that they had to turn the page sideways. So they're like, you're way over here. Like this is irrationally extroverted. And I think because of the pandemic, I've come back a little more to the middle. But I have a daughter who's very introverted, and she's probably as introverted as I am extroverted. And I used to think that she was just sad all the time. I really did. And it took a lot of work and care for me to recognize, no, that her worldview actually is different than mine. And it costs her energy to speak up in groups. It costs her energy to be around other people. And I'm like, this is the coolest thing ever. Like, let's have more people over. We have a pretty small house, and it's like, let's invite everyone over, and it's like, if it's not just us, like my wife and I and our dogs, she's like, okay, there's way too much going on here, right? So just recognizing even that is a neurodiversity, just the way that people process information, the way that people think. You might find on your team, if you're aware as a manager, you might find there's certain people on your team that will not speak up in meetings, but they might give you the most valuable feedback sideline when it's private, safe. You could say, Jen, how did that go? And they can give you the real lowdown. I'm like, this is what I think we might run into if we're not careful. This is an area that I'm a little concerned about. You might find that they're as mentally engaged, if not almost more mentally engaged, because they're not competing with everyone else in the room. A lot of times people do that. They're like, they want to get the last word in, so they're not even listening to what someone's saying because they need to speak next. A lot of times other people in the room will just listen and see what's actually happening. Mm-hmm. They're like, hey, did you notice that when you brought that up, those two people on the team checked out? No, I had that happen to me in a meeting where I was trying to present something, and one of my people said, yeah, they checked out. I was like, I didn't even notice that. I'm like, no, of course, because your idea was big and you wanted to show everyone, and it was amazing. Mm-hmm. And those two people, I didn't really take their advice at the time. They ended up, not intentionally, but because they weren't bought in, ended up being a really challenging time for the team because they were not that interested in moving forward in the same direction as everyone else. Oh, and I missed it. I missed it as a manager. So,
yeah.
But your question was around how do you, because you actually kind of seemed like you asked a couple things there. Were you asking how to prevent yourself from getting scared of the biases or the things that are like, I don't know what I don't know? And so
I think there's an element of first, like, how do you even recognize that you have a bias? like
Yeah.
just a flat out bias. And so, and
Okay.
what kind of got me thinking about this a little bit too is I was dinner table, my 7-year-old, she's in first grade, and she's just like, Mom, she's like, my friend group. I'm like, you're 7, you don't have a friend group yet, but she has a friend group. Okay. And
Yes.
she
Yeah.
says, one of my friend group decided to go play with another friend group. I'm like, okay, so what's the problem? Like,
Yeah.
7, like, you guys
Yeah.
aren't, I barely even going to know
Uh-huh.
each other, later, but she's just like, no, she said, we stick together. We don't,
Yes.
and I'm
Yeah.
like, and so I'm sitting here and literally in my mom heart, I'm going, my kid is biased against other kids, and she is 7. And I'm like, she has never, ever, ever learned this
Mm-hmm.
from any,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, like, we expose her to so many different things, but it's
Yes.
like
Yes.
literally she's naturally wired to say, these are my people, those are not my
Yep.
people.
Yeah.
And so now, I'm envisioning her, whatever, she's 7, right? Like, so
Yes.
25 years from now, and I'm like, she's going to be in a leadership position
Yes.
and
Yeah.
she has biases, right?
Yeah.
And so now here
Mm-hmm.
I'm talking to you about biases, and I'm like, oh, we have it inside of
Yeah.
us.
Yeah. Well, wasn't it? I don't remember the quote. Wasn't it Mark Twain that said something like travel is fatal to prejudice or something? Just recognizing that
Yeah.
when you're in the presence of someone else. I mean, have you ever seen this happen where people are like, well, those people, and you're one of those people. And they're like, well, not you.
Yeah.
You're different. It's like, well, like, how different am I if I'm those people? But like with you, I'm fine. There's a bias
Yeah.
happening right now. Like it's in progress.
Yes.
That's an interesting point there. I think that I think a couple things that I listen for. So when I listen to hiring managers or interviewers, when they're telling me about an experience with a candidate, there becomes a place where the reason goes from like the logical or the kind of describable to the indescribable. And here's what I mean by that. We had a hiring manager recently that was hiring a very important role. It was like the first person on this team. So I have to be empathetic here and recognize a 0 to 1 move is a big deal. If this person doesn't succeed in this role, it could set their whole company back a while because they're an early stage company. They have to have success here. So this is a highly emotional hire. And I think recognizing, I'll just call that out and say all hiring is emotional because everything humans do is emotional, right? And when you're thinking about, when you hear things like, well, could you spend an entire day in the airport with them? I shudder at those questions because I'm like, that has nothing to do with, can they do the job? Would they do the job? Would they enjoy doing the job? That's just whether or not you can get along with them, which is a whole different set of stuff that is important, but not important to hiring. Right. So when the reasoning behind, so what happened was we had a candidate that could have, I think, done the job just fine, but they ended up saying no thanks to this candidate. And when I asked them why, they started off with a few reasons that were, well, their prior experience wasn't with companies that are doing the same thing we're doing. Okay, that's an explainable reason. But then as they talked longer, the reasons became indescribable, meaning I just didn't feel very good about the way they answered this question. I just wasn't sure that they were really mentally engaged anymore. I just can't tell that they really want this job. So somewhere we went from something you can draw on a piece of paper and say, we need A and they're a B, to something that's like, they answered the question correctly, but I have doubts about whether or not they knew what they were saying, right? So now you're like, okay, now you can't trust what they're saying. So what's happening here? And if we roll back and think that both the candidate and the interviewer are trying their best, none of these people are trying to subvert the other one or lie or be, mischievous at all. Why would this hiring manager suddenly have all of this static in their mind about this? And it's because some biases got in there. And it could be very well simply be, if this person isn't very successful in this job, we might all be out of work. That's a very scary situation to be in. So they have to have a very high level of comfort. So the risk tolerance there becomes like the bias of like, I just don't feel good about it. So to try to put a fine point on the question, if you hear yourself or anyone else on your hiring team start to express feelings or emotions around why a person is or isn't right for the job, start to become cautious about what's happening. Okay. Because that's usually evidence that an emotion is involved. And then there is a bias in emotion, because we are emotional beings and biases are emotional. So how do you shortcut that? There's a book called, I'm going to think of the name, Crucial Conversations.
Okay. Yes.
In Crucial Conversations, there's another book called Thinking Fast and Slow that talks about very similar things. But Crucial Conversations makes the point that when our limbic system is engaged, that's like our lizard brain, it doesn't have words. It's like the oldest part of the human brain. So it just like does stuff. It's like fight, flight, or freeze. It's like, yes, no, like, I don't know. Like, and that's all it can do. And it can't explain anything very well. The only part of our brain that can explain is the frontal cortex up here. So the way to bring that back online, if you're in a conversation with someone, and in the book, it talks about when someone is mad at you. So you can use this as a manager. When one of your people is like, if you do this again, I'm leaving. You're like, oh, okay, I need to deal with this situation. They are way down inside their lizard brain. They're way down in there. They can't explain it. They're like locked up in their feelings. The way you bring that back online, and if you feel it in yourself, it becomes very important to do this, is to think, why would a reasonable, rational person say that kind of stuff to me right now? Right? And so it forces, if you're in that spot where you feel emotionally locked up, you have to force yourself to think about a complex question. This is like the mental equivalent of doing like big division problems. Like, you can't do that fast. You have to slow down and think it all the way through. So bringing your frontal cortex back online requires you to think hard. Why would this person, who is an educated, wonderful, talented person, they have a life that's full and they enjoy their hobbies, why would they say that? When I asked them that question about what they would do in this circumstance, why would they say that? If it came off to me like this very emotional, crazy thing, then I can bring myself back online with that. Now, if the role is reversed and you're trying to get out of one of your hiring team members why they're saying no, they're being very specific about blocking this person from being hired, or they won't talk to anyone else because they have to hire this person, ask them a complicated question. Can you explain to me why this candidate will, and you go back to sticking to the script, will you explain to me why they will do well in each of these 4 areas that we identified 3 weeks ago that we have to have in this job? Can you walk me through some specific things you've seen to show me that they can do X, Y, and Z, the things that we said are critical? Now, if they can do that, then that means that they must have had some kind of experiential evidence, and that can help bring it back online to more of an objective place. But if they come back to that situation and they end up saying, look, I just have a gut feel about it, okay? I just feel like it shouldn't be like that. What that tells you is there's a bias involved. Now, I just want to hesitate and say that doesn't mean you need to throw this out and go, oh, it didn't work. There's biases. Like, what do we do now? What it means is you need to slow down, go back and try the interview process again. Go back to the candidate and say, what candidate who could have, they really want this job, what candidate wouldn't want an additional opportunity to try again if it means that they might still get the opportunity to get the job? So then you might have to put on your 7th grade science fair hat for a second and go, what experiment could we create to try to see if this person actually knows how to read financial statements? Let's give them a financial statement and let's see if they can actually express it back to us and read it. Let's actually do something that allows us to let them show us what they can do and actually have an experience around whether the person can do the job or not. I'm not a big fan of home written tests and things like, oh, go write a preamble to the Constitution and get back to me. And if it's persuasive enough, then we'll hire you. That's like a really tricky place to go. But give the candidate another shot. Yeah, it didn't get everything we needed last time. I didn't get enough, in tech they say I got a little more noise than signal, right? Give me a chance to go back through this again. I'm going to bring another partner on into the interview, and we're just going to ask you a couple more questions. And I'm interested in, you could say things like, in your last interview, you said blank. Could you walk me through your reasoning there? Help me understand why that was your reason, because that seemed really different to me than your other responses. And they might have a really fascinating reason for you. Or they might not.
Yeah, right. So I like that though, because then it gives them everybody a chance to reevaluate, right? Yeah, and then then it would make sense then from there that the leaders and the managers who are conducting the interviews will get stronger the next time.
Yes.
But I was dying over here when you said, I just got a gut feeling. I cannot tell you how many times I've heard people say that, right? And so, and I'm on the other end. So I'm often dealing with, hey, we've hired these new people. Can you do some coaching and training for them? Right. We want to help them. And I've asked them before, I've asked the executives, so tell me about this person. Why did you bring them on? And I have literally heard them say, well, we just had a good gut feeling about them.
Gut feeling. Yeah.
And so I'm like, okay, good. I'm like, well, I hope that gut feeling works out. You know what I mean? And so here we go, and so it's interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a joke of like how to tell someone is a bad judge of character. It's anyone who has ever said, I'm a great judge of character. Oh. That is like, it's like a 1-to-1 relationship. Oh, have you ever said this? Oh, then you're not a good judge of character.
You're not. Yes. Right.
And that's facetious, but I think there is a tendency, especially I was talking with someone about earlier stage companies. There's a tendency for earlier stage companies to sometimes do that, where they just hire like, I need this fire put out, like, and you seem like excited and your price point is right. So let's go, and you just kind of do that. But having a little more rigor around the process and just being willing to slow it down, go back and ask the questions one more time, bring someone else into the room that hasn't been part of the experience before, and ask them even just to observe, go, did you see anything there that I missed? And just be reasonable. And then I think at the end of the day, if you get, I use a 5-star rating, 5-point rating, the importance of that is that the middle one means ask more questions, 3 out of 5.
Okay.
4 means yes, 5 means like strong yes, like 2 means probably not, and then 1 means strongly not.
Okay.
So the 3 intentionally means we should ask more questions here. I don't like systems where they're like, nope, 4-point rating, it's either thumbs up or thumbs down, that's it, that's the only choice you get. Like, humans aren't thumbs up, thumbs down kind of things.
Yeah. Right, exactly. And then it's the combination between those 3 different areas as well. So that makes sense. That's really good. You've been in recruiting, like I said, for 2,700 years, right? And so all said in love, Robert, all said in love. But
chisel out resumes in stone. Yeah.
Right, exactly. Oh my gosh. I do totally remember feeding a resume through like a fax machine.
The fax machine. Yeah.
Whoa. And that beep sound. Oh my gosh. Okay. And so short of those flashbacks, you have something that is a recruiter's manifesto.
Yes. Yeah.
Right. And so let's talk about this for a minute, because I know you're passionate about the whole recruiting industry. And so tell us, what is your recruiter manifesto?
Sure. So recruiter's manifesto really came out of this desire to, I think there's 2 things. One is recently in tech over the last couple of years since the pandemic, there's been a lot of investment in like, we're hiring everyone and salary inflation and all of these other things. And then as soon as the economy starts to stagnate a little bit, then a lot of recruiters are left out in the cold. And I've seen 2 scenarios. One is that really passionate, heartwarming people that really care about the other humans that they're working with are leaving the recruiting industry. They're like, I can't do it anymore because I have to feed my family. Right. So they take up jobs in project management or operations or sales or whatever it is that they take up, where it's not going to be nearly as up and down. And those are great careers. Don't get me wrong, but we miss having them in recruiting, where they are the front line to talent attraction, bringing people into your company. The other side is people that got into recruiting because honestly, the money was good and it was like a job that was available and everyone was hiring and they liked it. They got a spark and they got really excited and then they immediately get laid off. And they're like, well, this sucks. Like, why would I ever want to be a recruiter? I was a recruiter for 9 months and I got laid off. Like, this is a horrible industry. Well, that also leaves a whole bunch of really fascinating, talented people out in the cold too. And what I got really worried about is that what I don't want to see happen is that recruiting goes back to when I first started in the industry, when we started in the industry, there was a real reputation about headhunters and recruiters as almost like the real estate agents of business, of like, you know, the used car salesman, almost like where it's like, you know, you walk on the lot and you're like, you're trying to avoid seeing any people, you know, but then a recruiter walks up to you and you're like, oh, great. You know, I've been caught, you know.
Yeah.
The last thing you want when you go to a furniture store is there's that salesperson and they're like, hey, you looking at buying a couch today? You're like, no, I'm trying to get through to the mall. Can you leave me alone? So what I don't want to do is see the wonderful things that have happened with recruiting technology, adding marketing in as a whole skill set, sourcing and candidate attraction and employer branding, diversity and inclusion, all of these really wonderful, heartfelt things that are happening in the industry to kind of like get deflated because if the industry doesn't really respect what has been happening here, a lot of really fascinating, talented people that could innovate in this industry could go away. So the Recruiter's Manifesto is really intended to be, I looked all around. I actually looked all around to try to see if there was anything like this that existed. I didn't really see anything. So I just got a couple of colleagues together and we started to bang out a draft, and we've got something that we're trying to publish out to the world now, and who knows where it'll go. But what it means to me is recruiting is a partnership between candidates, talent attraction or recruiting, and companies. And if all three of us agree that we're all trying to do the same thing, we're trying to bring great people to work in great companies to do great things, and we're all looking out for the best interests of the others, we could really do great things. There's a friend of mine, Robert Buckley, who says people create all value. It is the case that all the technology that we love, you know, rocket ships, you know, transforming Mars into another Earth, like all of these potential things for human development, curing cancer, all of these things, they wouldn't even exist without humans, right? Mm-hmm. People are the reason that these things are happening. Rocket ships wouldn't build themselves, right? So we get to be a part of whatever, you know, the next 1,000 years of humanity looks like. And I think if we miss out on this chance to keep great, interesting, creative, talented, wholehearted people in recruiting, we will miss out on what that can actually create over the next 20 to 50 years. Mm-hmm. So that's their manifesto. That's what it's about.
That's so good. I appreciate that you're doing that. I remember back in 2009 when I stepped away from recruiting, because I'd been in it for 11 years. I mean, talked to untold number of people, all the placements and stuff. And I'm like, and I'm good. I'm going to tap out. Thanks. See you later, you know? And so, and I remember even back then I had some clients who were like, what do you mean you're not doing this anymore? Because I built those relationships with them. I knew the talent, you know, and all those great ways that a really strong recruiter can help bring awesome talent. And they're like, this is the perspective of the manager at the time. They're like, we built a relationship with you, Jennifer, to be this great recruiter. And now you're leaving. You know, it's kind of like having a great relationship with your doctor, or a relationship with your teacher, or a relationship with that salesperson who, you know, whatever, or it could be like even a real estate agent who's like, you know, they know the type of homes you're looking for, and they only bring you the things that you really need. And so, and I know that I'm not alone. I have talked to other recruiters in the last 13 some odd years, you know, who've left the industry as well, because they're like, I'm just fried. I can't handle it. Can't handle
anymore. It. Yeah. It's unfortunate because when the process of what we do gets boiled down to just the transaction, it costs you something. It costs you something every time. And that's not good. But you know, I was joking before about how I was relieved when you left, but there was a palpable difference. We were both in the same market, and there was a difference when you were no longer, you know, active in recruiting here. And I think that's a thing that's real. So I think the point of that is that if we boil down recruiting to its lowest common denominator, what is that? That's basically the equivalent of outsourcing resume writing to somewhere where it's the cheapest on the planet. And it's like, there's no human interaction anymore. It's just, transactional, basically, two systems talking to each other. And there's actually no, humanity being developed there. And the reason you were great in recruiting, I think, that you already said it, is recruiting is a transactional thing. I have a job opening, I fill it. I have a job opening and I fill it. But what you were actually doing along the way is creating relationships across whole longitudinal careers with people, with hiring managers, with the people that join their teams, with their whole teams. If their company got bought out by a new company, you're helping with that other company. All of these different pieces that you were doing. Great recruiters have always done that. Great real estate agents. My real estate agent I've used now several times because I don't ever want to give this guy up because he does know exactly what I need. He knows me well enough to know that, like, yeah, you're not gonna like that, so those are all really great pieces. The intention of the manifesto is really to say, hey, this business is different than people, I think, used to think. And we have an opportunity to do better if we just agree on some ground rules, and it's very simple things like, if you ask a recruiter to work on a job, don't ghost them. Right?
Golly, right?
Don't, if once they go find you 10 people to talk to, don't just go, we decided not to do it. Be in communication with people. If you're going to give someone the time to do an interview, show up to the interview. If the candidate also says, I'll do the interview, they need to show up to the interview also. It's very simple ground rules, but the intention is, hey, we could make this industry a little better if we cared about each other.
Right. What a novel idea. Some caring. What? Wow, mind blown. Emoji with the brain exploding. So to that point, let's give us your definition of compassion in the workplace.
There's a scene in a movie that I like. I'm a dad, so I watch a lot of Disney shows in my life. Meet the Robinsons, where there's all mayhem is happening inside a science fair, and the science teacher says, let's all behave in a way that we'll be proud of in the morning, right? And I think that compassion in the workplace, what strikes me is this idea that, look, I don't have to be like open-hearted, like everything's on my sleeve, like every feeling I have, I cry in meetings. I don't have to be that person, but I can show up as a whole self. So that means, I think, a couple things. One, when I think of compassion in the workplace, I think, do I have compassion for me? So I get up in the morning, I have dreams and goals and hopes and desires. I have kids that tuition I need to pay for. I have other things I have to worry about. And I have to have some compassion for me of, like, some days I'm going to do great and some days I'm not. I saw a bumper sticker once that says, some days the dragon wins. And it had a little sword, that was like laying down, because some days the dragon wins, and you just have to kind of have compassion and go, yeah, this is kind of a dragon wins kind of a day. Sometimes you get to slay the dragon, but and then if you are able to have compassion inside yourself and maybe create an opportunity or a place for you to be safe and consistent with yourself about who you are, I think it allows you to show up a little more meaningfully in the world of other people, in your workplace, in your relationships. And so then compassion in the workplace becomes an opportunity for me to kind of, emotionally put my phone down when someone on the team is needing something, and actually listen to what they mean, not what they say.
Oh, yeah.
And hear them all the way through. Let me make sure that they see that I see them. That doesn't mean I need to change everything and go, you know what, that's a great point. The CEO should no longer be in charge. You're in charge now because you have great ideas. That's not what that means. But what it means is showing up all the way. And if I'm distracted mentally or emotionally, if I'm stressed and I'm not able to have compassion inside here, it's really difficult for me to show up with the compassion for someone else. Because what I've noticed is when I'm not in that good place and someone's talking to me, I just feel like, man, what a complainer.
Right.
And nothing's ever good enough for them. That's the mental thing that's happening. And that usually means that I forgot to check in here. And I've even had to say to people, I can tell this is big. Can I call you back? Or can we talk about this tomorrow morning? I just really want to pay attention to you, and I'm not sure that I'm there right now.
Yeah, that's good.
that feels strange to say it, right? They're like, oh, I
Mhm.
want to talk about it now. But it actually usually ends up being a much better conversation. You guys
Mhm.
show up.
Mhm. Mhm.
I don't feel like I got taken hostage where they're like, oh, hey, since you're here, let me tell you about all this stuff,
Yeah, right.
you know,
Yeah.
and I can like be there and be
Uh-huh.
ready.
Yeah,
So
for sure.
fashion in the workplace, I think back to the let's all behave in a way we feel good about in the morning.
Hmm.
I hope that in a decade from now, the people that we work with today, tomorrow, next week feel like, yeah, I wonder what Jen's doing. They're a good person. They're good people,
Yeah.
Um, if I care enough, if I have compassion for me and for you in the workplace, I think that that's, you know,
Hmm.
it would be a positive memory rather than
Yeah.
something like, oh, I really should have paid more attention.
Yeah. I love that. I love that. And it's that net positive at the end, right? Because it doesn't mean
Yeah,
you're going to be like sparkling, super amazing every moment, right? It's
yeah,
the
probably not.
overall experiences and being real.
Yeah,
Like, okay. Like, I loved your
yeah.
idea. I'm checking in on myself. I'm kind of struggling right now. Can we talk
Hmm.
about this tomorrow morning or after lunch or
Yeah,
whatever it is? And
yeah.
that's being really real, because I think sometimes, I know for a lot of tech leaders that I'm dealing with emotionally, sometimes they're not sure how to handle it,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
They're going,
Hmm.
I don't know what to do in this. So they're
Hmm.
just going to listen, but they're not really present. And
Hmm.
then that causes even more issues. So I'm glad that
Yes.
you gave that example of how to literally wordsmith that. So it's good.
Yeah. Yeah, I have in my life tended to be very like literal about things, and um I think it's fair to say this. I don't think I was a very empathetic person until maybe a couple of years ago. And this has been through a lot of honestly therapy and working through some things like that happened early in my life that I was like, oh yeah, that's how I learned to not care. Like
Mhm,
that
mhm.
moment was when I'm like, nope, I'm never going to care about somebody else. I'm just going to do my thing. And I think that in tech, there's a tendency sometimes it's everything is X or Y. It's yes, no, on, off.
Yeah.
And it gets really scary when your person, your employee, your person on your team, who is a human with emotions, whether they agree to them or not, or believe them or not, suddenly has like they bottled it up for how long, and then it all comes out, and it comes out at you because you're the person that's in
Right.
front of them.
Right.
Like, how are you supposed to deal with that? And I'll be honest that you probably can't deal with a lot of it, but what you can do is feel with them and say something like, wow, that's really hard. I don't know how I would deal with that.
Mhm. Yeah.
Is there anything I can do?
Right. So good. Absolutely. And let's be real, right? Real with
Yeah.
ourselves and real with the other people. So good. Oh, so
Yeah.
good. Robert, holy cow, we could talk about so many more things. Oh my goodness. Okay, so we're gonna
You
have
talked
to.
about like people being shiny all the time. Like, do you get to that point now where you don't trust those people? You're like, there's no way you could be happy this often.
Yeah, right. No, it's true. It's very true.
Yeah.
Yes, yes, yes. And it's yeah, that's that's a whole nother conversation on another day, because we are we're trying to do the happy-go-lucky as much as we can everywhere, and it's a
Yeah.
load of like
Yeah.
it doesn't make
Yep.
sense, and then that's leading to all of these issues that are leading to this recruiter's manifesto that you're talking
Uh-huh.
about, right?
Uh-huh.
And then
Yeah.
also coming back to, like, people can't even get real around the facts around what they need to hire for, and then they're coming
Yes.
back to, well, I've got a good gut
Gut
feeling about
feel.
this.
Uh-huh.
It's like, well, hello, no,
Yeah.
not going to be helpful, right? But it's
Yeah.
because we're not slowing down. And I know you mentioned
Uh-huh.
that a few times on our show today, right? But we're not
Mm-hmm.
slowing down. We're not
Mm-hmm.
acknowledging, this something's off here and what's going on. But it's because we're all running at Mach whatever speed.
Right.
And it's like,
Right.
we can't keep this up, you guys. No wonder we're having all these mental breakdowns. And
Uh-huh.
statistics show that like 1 in 3 people will have a mental episode every year. So it means
Mm.
a third of your team are going to
Mm.
have a mental, and that could be you yourself,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like, no
Mm-hmm.
wonder we're making bad hiring decisions,
Right.
So
Right. Yes.
all these, so it's like, okay, guys, let's just take a deep breath. We can get through this for sure. So, Robert, as we're pulling all of this together today, I'd love to just get one nugget of advice from you. I know you've shared lots of amazing things, but is there something that you would want to leave with the tech leaders who are listening to today's top leaders? One thing that you want them to hear from you?
Yeah, I think relative to the context around hiring made human, just, maybe the next time you're about to send an offer out, just remember, like, I remember someone said this to me once. They said, look, besides the person you marry or live with, right? Or the house that you buy or where you choose to live, your job is the next most important thing that you do. Think about every time, we've had if you think of holiday parties or anytime you catch up with someone, they're like, where are you working now? Like, I wish we had a better way to talk about people, right? I wish we had a better way to go, how are you earning economic income? I wish that doesn't even make sense when you think about it, but that's what we do. Where are you working now? Oh, that's a very reputable company. Now my respect of you goes up. So just recognize something in that, like, you're about to ask someone to make the third most emotional, critical decision of their life, to put all of their hopes and dreams inside the basket that you're providing for them. And are you ready to do that? And if you cannot lose track of the humanity of the situation that you're asking someone to go through, and you feel good about it, it's probably going to be a great hire.
Yeah. Oh, so good. Thank you for that. I love it. Thanks for keeping it real. It's like, you're like doing hiring made human. Weird.
Yeah. Which is crazy because I'm such a programmatic person. I have like, my team laughs that I have a robot in the background doing all my work. And I'm like, yay, that's fine. I'm fine with that. As long as I can be human and let the robot do the robot stuff.
Right. Exactly. That's smart. Now it sounds like automation and systems. I love it. That's good. So what's the one way that people can reach you?
Okay, so let's see. LinkedIn is probably a great way to find me and the things that we talk about. My username is Robert Merrill there. The company is Connected Well, like well connected, but backwards, connectedwell.com.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much. And again, Robert, thank you so much for joining me on this episode of Today's Leaders.
Thank you, Jen.
Thank you.